Hello everyone and welcome to our Central America webinar. We're delighted you can join us as we talk through 4 of the region's most diverse and interesting countries. First up, our founder Jonny will give a brief overview of the region, followed by a Latin America expert Richard, who will talk about his passion, Nicaragua. Our head of operations Marc will then talk us through 2 of the lesser known countries, El Salvador and Honduras. And then we'll head back to Jonny, who'll be talking about his recent visit to Guatemala. The talk will last around 50 minutes, after which we'll have around 10 minutes for questions. So if you'd like to ask anything of our panel, you'll see there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you'll be able to type a question. And then at the end of the talk, time permitting, we'll go through some of those. As ever, we'll send a link of the recording of this webinar tomorrow in an email, so look out for that. So you can view it again or share it with friends. Without further ado now, I'll hand over to Jonny, who's going to introduce Central America.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 5th webinar. Very exciting to have you all here and to be talking about a part of the world that we don't normally talk about. The first 4 webinars, we've been heading east to talk about the Silk Road, talk about Pakistan, the Middle East, and the Caucasus. So it's really nice that we are heading west this time, over the pond and into Central America. And I have to say, I feel that this particular part of the Americas is rather often overlooked in favor of its perhaps more glamorous neighbors. To the north, obviously, you have Mexico, which I believe is the 7th most visited tourist destination on the planet. And to the south, in South America, of course, you have big hitters like Brazil, Argentina, and Peru. But I hope that over the course of the next hour or so, we'll be able to convince you or to share our passion for this part of the world, because I think for the curious traveler, it really does have everything. So as Mike's just said, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about my own story with this part of the world before handing over to Richard, who will talk about Nicaragua, and then Marc will talk about El Salvador and Honduras, and then I will come back to talk about one of my favorite countries, Guatemala, which you can see behind me. So as is usual with our talks, we're going to use group tours, the structure of group tours, to tell the story of each particular country, or the routing that we can take, because, as I say, it gives us a structure. But do please bear in mind that while Frontiers is a 50-50 business, 50% is small group tours, fixed date departures, and 50% is private tailor-made holidays. We have travel consultants, travel specialists, both here in London and in America with Richard, who can put these trips together for you on a private basis. So please bear that in mind. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and crack on telling you about my own history and my time in this part of the world. So as many of you will know, if you watch these webinars, you'll know that during the 90s, I did 3 big adventures. I drove a motorbike right the way around Africa. I walked through parts of India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and I rode a horse along the Silk Road. These gave rise to my 3 travel books, Running with the Moon, about the motorcycle trip, For a Pagan Song, about the walk through India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and Silk Dreams, Troubled Road, about the horse ride along the Silk Road, which was also a Discovery Channel film. However, prior to all that, I was in Central America. And here I am sitting on a rooftop in San Salvador, I think probably about April 1990. Now, I won't go into a huge amount of detail as to why I found myself there, but suffice to say I'd quit the band that I was singing in. I had gone off traveling. I'd become a ski instructor in North America, and a freakishly hot spring melted all the snow, and I found myself at a loose end, so I jumped on a plane and headed to Belize. I've got to be honest, I wasn't enamored with Belize. It was a holiday, vacation destination primarily, with lots of families and friends all holidaying together, having fun out on the beach, and I felt rather lonesome. So I jumped on a bus and I crossed the border into Guatemala. And although you can't really tell that's me, that is a picture of me in 1990 at Tikal. And immediately, not even having crossed the border, having got on the bus and met a couple of fellow backpackers, I immediately felt more like my old self and really kind of fell in love with Guatemala. It was a traveler's travel place. It wasn't a holiday destination, it was a travel destination. And I think that's pretty much true today as it was then. Of course, it was at the time going through a lot of difficulties from the 70s through the 80s to the mid-90s. This was a time of turmoil in Central America. There were various left-wing movements trying to knock out the governmental right-wing governments, the FMLN in El Salvador. I'm sure everyone will remember the Iran for Contra deal where the Americans sold arms to Iran to funnel the proceeds through to the Contras to fight the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And Guatemala had various left-wing guerrilla movements as well fighting their government. Interestingly, and I'm sure I won't be alone here, this whole kind of period came to me not through CNN or the BBC, but through an English punk rock band called The Clash, whose fourth album was called Sandinista. It was a triple album, and as a naive young 16-year-old, of course, I knew nothing about wars going on in Central America, but this started to enlighten me, particularly songs like Washington Bullets. But without meaning to trivialize it, it was a time of great hardship, and no one knows the exact numbers of people that died during this period, but it could be anything up to 500,000 people. 200,000 alone in Guatemala are said to have lost their lives. But despite this, and the fact that it was pretty dangerous for me back in 1990, the civil wars were still going on. In fact, shortly after having had this photograph taken, there was a car bomb went off in San Salvador and blew up a governmental building just a block away from where I was staying. I got dragged off a bus by a bunch of militia, and there was a bullet hole through the window of the bus exactly next to my head. So it was a bit of an odd time to be there. But despite all that, I still found this an absolutely riveting and beautiful part of the world. For a start, I'd never seen volcanoes. And suddenly here I was surrounded by this land of volcanoes, absolutely stunning landscapes. I'd never seen Spanish colonial architecture before. And I stayed for 3 weeks in Antigua, and I stayed with the family and learned Spanish. And I was just blown away by this incredible architecture, more of which we will talk about a little bit later. The culture of these countries, the strange mixture of the old pagan ways merging with the kind of more modern Catholicism was fascinating. But above all, it was the people. And the people were what really excited me and made me love the place. The color of these countries, the clothing, and the friendliness of the people. And indeed, just as a kind of side note, when I returned, I wrote my first ever travel article. I've written hundreds of articles since, but this was the first one I ever wrote. It was published by the Nottinghamshire Gazette, and it was about a trip up to the market of Chichicastenango, where I sat on a chicken bus, again, which I'll show you a little bit later, with four female generation of the same family. And get this, the great-grandmother was 48. Her daughter was 28, her daughter was 14, and her daughter was 4 months. So that was quite an eye-opener, along with the goats and the chickens that were on the bus as well. But it was fascinating. Of course, I've written my 3 books since and stuff, so that was the beginning of what I suppose was my brief foray into travel writing. And as I say, I kind of fell in love with it. I spent 6 weeks in the area, went down into El Salvador, into Honduras. I didn't make it to Nicaragua, sadly, so that's a place I want to go to sometime soon. So that's my story with the region. What we also want to do just before we move on to get Richard to talk about Nicaragua is quickly share the fact that we are launching this new group tour called the Central Asian Odyssey. We're finding that these quite long group tours through multi-countries are really popular. The Great Silk Road Adventure, for example, has proved very popular. and this one we're hoping to as well. We're launching it for the first time in October 2021. It was due to go in February 2021, but we're obviously going to not do that for the time being. And it will take you through all the highlights of this most fascinating part of the world, starting in Nicaragua, heading up through El Salvador and Honduras, and then doing the major sites of Guatemala. So that's a group tour that you can do to do all the countries. However, we are going to talk about individual tours around the individual countries. And I am going to now get out of the way and let Richard tell you about Nicaragua. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Johnny. It's a great introduction. And I think I share some of the common experiences that Johnny had with why I fell in love with Central America. You can see behind me the island of Ometepe and Lake Nicaragua, really one of the most iconic destinations in Nicaragua. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on me, and then we'll get on with the tour. I also wrote some books, but in Nicaragua, I authored a photo book on the Nicaraguan people. You can see with the sailboat. Actually authored the first guidebook ever dedicated just to Nicaragua, which was published in Bath, England, by Footprint. I did a lot of guiding. I learned to be a naturalist, and I also founded a nature reserve. And that has been a really amazing experience, but I really wanted to share all of Latin America with travelers, and that's why I'm at Wild Frontiers, to have that privilege. You can see me here at the nature reserve I founded, which is in the central mountains of Nicaragua, and we'll actually stop there on this round trip we do of Nicaragua following the group tour. A little bit about the country, its size, its location. You can see it's in the middle of Central America, bathed by two seas. It's got Great Lakes. It's mostly a lowland country, so it's very warm. It's about the size of Greece or New York State. It's got the lowest population density. It's 5 times bigger than El Salvador, but has the same population of about 6.5 million people. Nicaraguans call it the land of lakes and volcanoes because it's really the lakes that distinguish it from the rest of the Isthmus countries. As Johnny went through the Sandinistas, I also had that Clash album, Johnny. And the Sandinista revolution happened really because it was necessary. Coup d'etats were not the standard course in Nicaragua, so the only way to get rid of a dictatorship was to overthrow it. And it was the only successful Marxist-led revolution on the mainland Americas ever done, and it was necessary, really. But unfortunately, for a lot of people who participated that weren't Sandinistas, they felt like another dictatorship was installed, so they began a contra-revolutionary war called the Contra War by the media. And when the US got involved, well, that really brought infamy to Nicaragua. In 1990, they had a free and fair election that was lost by the Sandinistas, and despite having power, total control over the US, over the Nicaraguan institutions, they handed over power peacefully, to their credit. And to this day, we have democracy in Nicaragua. It's one of the safest places to travel in Latin America. You can see the group tour itinerary here, which we run twice a year in June and November. It's basically a counterclockwise loop around the Great Lakes. You visit the colonial cities of León and Granada, and really get into Lake Nicaragua, down the Rio San Juan, and up into the highlands of the coffee country. The start of the trip obviously is in Managua, where you land, and I call it the Invisible City because it was destroyed in an earthquake in 1972, and the seismologist said, don't bother, and the Nicaraguans paid them heed. So there was never rebuilt. So what you have is a sprawling suburbia with a lot of trees on the south shore of Lake Managua, which you see in the background. So we'll take a look on the second day of the trip of the principal sites in this economic and political capital of Nicaragua, and then head south to the shores of Lake Nicaragua and Granada, which is one of the oldest cities in its original location in the mainland Americas, founded in 1524. Classic architecture, really beautifully restored in many parts. It was sacked many times by pirates, both British and French pirates, and also some Dutch pirates, because it was a Caribbean port 400 kilometers from the Caribbean Sea. That is to say that going up the San Juan River and across the lake, goods were shipped from Nicaragua, from as far away as Peru, and then across the lake and down the river out to Spain. So it was really a wealthy port city on Lake Nicaragua, and you can see the cathedral here in Lake Nicaragua in the background. What's great about Granada is it has tourism. It's the #1 destination in Nicaragua, really, but it's still real. And it's not taken over by tourism or touristic enterprise. So you can see the butcher, the florist, and this family selling fruit. It's a great way to experience Nicaraguan culture in a beautiful setting. From Granada, we have the next day, we have a very interesting trip up to the villages in the highlands behind Granada. The Mesa Villages are a series of small Chorotega Indian villages that were conquered by the Spanish. There's a little Spanish colonial church in each one. Each one has a distinct artisan craft. And so we go through these villages, we're very close together on a day trip and meet the people. You see folkloric dancers here, which were the most popular activities for the local kids. You have 2, 3, even 10 folkloric dance troupes in each one of these villages. Nicaragua has a great ceramic tradition, and the school of pottery that's most advanced is in San Juan de Oriente, one of these Mesa villages. So we'll visit a workshop there and see some of their work and meet with them. In Catarina, we also have a great view of one of Nicaragua's 12 crater lakes. This Mediterranean blue lake is also a nature reserve. There's 6 species of fish found nowhere else in the world in this lake. You can see back to Mombacho volcano and just the tip of Granada on the left. We also take advantage of the traditional foods in the Mesa villages. Take this opportunity to talk a little bit about Nicaraguan food because it's a lot of people who visit really consider it to be an excellent kitchen. There's no particular sauce or plate that makes it outstanding or draws the attention of international cuisine lovers. It's just really that the cooking of the Nicaraguan kitchen allows the natural flavors of the food to come through. So if you visit Nicaragua, detox your palate, get off the hot sauce, and let the real flavors of fresh ingredients, locally grown, come through. Corn is one of the staples of the Nicaraguan diet. You can see here in this image, different types of tortilla, different types of cornbread, biscuits, even corn drinks. You see the powder on the right. And then you have a Nicaraguan version of tamales and a nacatamal wrapped in that banana leaf on the low left. So Nicaragua is a great eating experience. We'll go down out of the villages to a small nature reserve where you can see a lot of interesting wildlife. The main attraction are 800 pairs of nesting parakeets in a cliff where there's a waterfall. You can see one of the parakeets here. So that's a beautiful noise when all these parakeets come back to roost, and we'll be there at that time about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. At dusk, we'll end up in the Masaya Volcano National Park, which is 7 craters in a caldera, and one of them is active. You get a hard hat, is included in the admission because it's a very active volcano for safety, and group size is limited. To see the Santiago Crater, which is one of the real sites in Nicaragua and one of the few volcanoes in the world where the magma level doesn't raise or go down. It's really just always at this level. So if the smoke levels permit, you get an amazing view. There's a shot at dusk. And then at night, you see a lava lake. It's actually a cascade of lava onto a lava pool there. So the sounds are amazing. The views are great. And of course, great photography. Nicaragua has a geography that's very exotic. It's got its own little rift valley. And the continental plate is broken off and is sinking. So you have numerous crater lakes. I think the most out of any country except in the African continent. And you see the 2 Great Lakes here. And we are going to visit Lake Nicaragua in depth here in this tour. And in this presentation, you can see Ometepe Island, which is made up of 2 volcanoes. One in the foreground, extinct, wrapped in cloud forest with a crater lake. And the one in the back, active, great for hiking, biking, kayaking, and also there's a very interesting culture on the island. 32,000 people populate it. And the lake's great to swim in, of course. You can see the coastline here. The trade winds that blow across the Caribbean cross Nicaragua and cross this great lake and bring a nice breeze to this very warm climate. And everywhere you look, there's volcanic vistas on the island. We're going to do a cultural tour for everyone that goes, and these statues are part of archaeological remains that date back to 3000 BC. Nicaragua was in the trade route that stretched from Peru all the way to Mexico. Nicaragua is the northernmost use of the coca leaf. And so you can see that coca leaves come from Peru and Bolivia, and they made it all the way up to Nicaragua. So these statues are part of a lot of interesting remains on the island, and we'll do that on our trip. Have a look at these and some of the other remains. This is me giving thanks for this beautiful waterfall. It's about a 2-hour hike up through cloud forest to this cascade, which is about 3 times taller than my computer screen. But you can also do a harder hike, which is about 5 hours up to the summit of that crater lake I showed you earlier. Some interesting cultural markers in Nicaragua. You've got something that you don't see anywhere else in Nicaragua. That's bulls being used as work animals. And these kids are bringing these tame bulls home with cooking wood. We'll go back on the mainland in our trip and head to the southern shore of Lake Nicaragua before taking a private boat across to this very remote archipelago. Natural beauty and also interesting culture. But what most impresses everyone when they arrive is just the complete peace and silence of the place. Once the outboard motor shuts off, you could be transported back 200 years in time. There's no telephones, roads. Electricity. Will have a visit to some of the local artists. There's a school of primitivist painting, and you can see one of the principal artists here painting the nature that surrounds them. There's also balsa wood sculptors. We have as many as 4 generations of artists sitting around a table and working and laughing together. So it's a beautiful way to get to meet the Nicaraguans and see their art. On the way out, we'll pass by a bird sanctuary, Los Guatusos. You can see some rosette spoonbills leaving this island where there's usually about 15,000 birds nesting. It's not a big island, so it's an amazing sight. Down the San Juan River we head. The Great Waterway, it's the only drainage of Lake Nicaragua, so there's a lot of water going out there. It drains all the way to the Caribbean. We'll go about halfway down the river, viewing wildlife en route. You know, we've got 3 species of monkeys. We've got lots of different reptiles, including these big black crocodiles. And we'll arrive at El Castillo. It's a beautiful little town with a Spanish fortress built in 1675 to stop the pirate attacks on Granada. It was successful, but one expedition did manage to take the fortress. It was a Captain Nelson, who would later be a famous British naval hero. He was in his 20s and he took the fortress, but overland. It was never conquered by the river. He took it overland from the left part of the screen you see. So El Castillo is a beautiful little town, and we use it to explore the Indio Maiz Biological Reserve, which is really one of the most pristine rainforest reserves in all of Central America, and has over 400 species of birds, 3 species of toucans, for example, like this keel-billed toucan. You have the scarlet macaw and the very endangered green macaw there. You have all kinds of mammals, monkeys, sloths like this smiling one, and poison dart frogs, which people love because of their psychedelic designs to warn predators not to eat them. After the rainforest, we head to an entirely different area of Nicaragua, where the northern coffee growing highlands, where it's a lot cooler. You've got cloud forest. You've got a lot of German immigrants in their offspring. So you've got a different type of people there who came to plant coffee. This hacienda produces organic cheeses and produce, and single estate coffee, which is all served in that little restaurant across the pond. We'll see the hacienda and also go for a hike in the cloud forest. One of the residents is one of the most beautiful birds on earth, and that's the resplendent Quetzal, sacred bird for the Maya, and it lives in the forest, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see that in Selva Negra. We'll come down out of the mountains to the lower mountains close to the Pacific, to the nature reserve I founded. The basis of that reserve, really, its reason for existence is this endangered iguana. It's extremely rare and almost extinct. And what we'll do for Wild Frontier visitors is we'll capture one that's in a high-risk area. We'll hold it for our visitors, and then our guests can take a good look at it. It's a little dinosaur, and release it into the reserve. The nature reserve is closed to everything except scientific visits, so this is really a Wild Frontiers exclusive. After the nature reserve, we go on to León, which is the other principal colonial city, really the home of the Nicaraguan Revolution, art, and ground zero for poetry, which is its national pastime. You can see there are many murals, Revolutionary period murals, like these kids are playing in front of, and over 12 colonial period churches, including the grandest temple in all of Central America. This is the Cathedral of León, UNESCO World Heritage Building. Took 113 years to complete. We'll go on the roof and have a great look at the volcanoes nearby and also the rest of the city. We'll visit the market to see all those fresh ingredients that make Nicaraguan food so attractive and so tasty. This is an interesting graffiti here on the streets of León. Literally, it says, without poetry, there's no city, but what it means figuratively is, without poetry, we don't exist. And poetry is really an essential part of Nicaraguan life. A little difficult for English speakers to get a grasp on, but our guides will do a good job of explaining its importance. Some of the greatest poets in the Spanish language come from León. One of them is Rubén Darío, who's in this collection of poetry. You can see these soldiers, Nicaraguan soldiers, have traded in their assault rifles for poetry, which I think is a very good strategy for world peace. We have some of the best museums in Nicaragua, and you can see there top artists like Armando Morales, who painted Sandino, the namesake for the Sandinistas, in his own particular style. And we'll also head out to the Maribios volcanic range, which is an amazing place. In 60-kilometer stretch, you have 21 volcanoes, 5 of them active. So from the easy hike to this summit, you can see that range, and you can either hike back down or go down really quickly. It's a sled that's custom built for sledding on Cerro Negro Volcano, so you can either hike down or do it this way. We supply the overalls, the sleds, the goggles, and all the equipment, and a little bit of a training, and you get down in a hurry. After León, we head back along shores of Lake Managua to our final destination to head home. And you see some of the other volcanoes like Momotombo, an iconic volcano that Victor Hugo wrote a poem about. And for those of you that are on the group excursion, you can do an extension to either the Caribbean or the Pacific. For private tours, we can build that in, obviously, to the program. The Nicaraguan Caribbean is not unlike any other place in the Caribbean. It's got the turquoise seas and the great snorkeling, but there's no all-inclusive resorts, cruise ships. It's a very natural experience, beautiful. And on the Pacific, we have some beautiful private beaches on the South Pacific coast. This is a really upscale eco lodge that has their own beach and 4,000 acres of private forest. So that's Nicaragua. I hope you guys get a chance to visit soon. And I'm going to hand over to Marc.
Thank you, Richard. Fantastic. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. By way of an introduction to my area, I'm going to start off by posing a question to you in the style of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Now, for those of you who don't know this game show, contestants get asked a series of questions and they get given, for each question, 4 potential answers that they need to decide which is the right answer. So with that in mind, imagine you're right at the end of your run, you've got the chance of winning $1 million or pounds or euros or whatever it is, and this is your question. In which year did Christopher Columbus first reach mainland America? Was it A, 1472, B, 1482, C, 1492, or D, 1502? Now, if you said the answer was 1492, you'd be wrong. The answer was actually 1502. 1492 date, which is obviously the most famous date, was the year that Columbus got to the Americas, but on that trip he only got as far as the Bahamas. The first time he actually reached the mainland was on his 4th voyage 10 years later in 1502. So congratulations if you've just won $1 million, and commiserations if you've just lost $1 million. But by way of a bonus question, I'm going to ask you another one. Where in America on the mainland did Columbus first reach?
Cuba.
And this is related to what I'm about to talk about. The answer is Honduras. And there you go, I've done an arrow showing you exactly where Columbus first hit the mainland. This is a town called Trujillo. And Columbus was so impressed by the deep waters there and the depths of the water there that he named the land after the depths. And the Spanish for depths is Honduras, and that's where the name comes from. So there you go. El Salvador and Honduras, which are the 2 that I'm going to get to talk about, are, as Jonny said, often the 2 most neglected and overlooked countries when people are traveling through the region. And I think that's on one level a real shame, but it's also a really great opportunity to really get beneath the surface and really kind of see what these two countries have to offer. El Salvador itself is the smallest country in the whole of Central America. Honduras is the second largest, but almost the entire eastern side of Honduras is very sparsely populated, rivers and forests. So most of the kind of interaction is around El Salvador and on the western side of Honduras. Now, like Nicaragua and Guatemala, both countries have had their fair share of turmoil over recent years. El Salvador, during the time that Jonny was there, was in the middle of a civil war. It was a 12-year civil war from 1980 through to 1992. And Honduras, for much of the 20th century, was almost the archetypal banana republic with high levels of corruption and foreign influence. And interestingly, the two countries, El Salvador and Honduras, actually went to war with each other, albeit only for 5 days. And it's quite a famous war. It's often referred to as the football war or the soccer war, because there was a football match right in the middle of the tension, and there was a fight that broke out during the football match. And as a consequence, there were border closures, there was invasions, there was bombing of each other's airports. And fortunately, the war only lasted 5 days, even though the tension did last for quite a long time. I'm very happy to say now that the two countries are much friendlier with each other. And the trip which I'm going to talk you through is a 2-week trip called The Secrets of Central America, which spends about a week in El Salvador and a week then in Honduras. So it's nicely balanced between the two and effectively taking you from the Pacific right the way over to the Caribbean. So the tour starts in El Salvador's capital, San Salvador, which is where you saw that photograph of Jonny. Now, to be honest, San Salvador is probably not going to be your favorite city in the whole of the Americas unless you have very particular tastes. But one of the interesting things there is, I suppose, a difference to all the beautiful colonial churches there, this is actually some people's favorite church in the Americas. It was built only in 1971. It's called El Rosario, and from the outside it doesn't look anything special, but it's been built so that in the early morning and late afternoon, the light through the windows is absolutely stunning and gives you this really beautiful, ethereal kind of start for your tour. But we leave San Salvador quite quickly, and we head out to a bay called Jiquilisco, which is actually Central America's largest estuary, which feeds out onto the Pacific. And the main reason for coming here is for the hawksbill turtle. Now, this is actually one of the world's most endangered sea turtles. And our main reason for coming here is to team up with these guys at ICAPO. And this is a not-for-profit organization that are dealing with the preservation and conservation of the turtles, and we'll spend half a day with them learning about what they do, seeing what they do to preserve kind of the environment for the turtles, both on the beaches and in the water, and seeing how they generate funds from visitors in order to continue their projects. So they actually operate over 9 countries in the region, but El Salvador is actually one of their main regions for this. So it's a really nice special experience. From there, we leave the coast and we head up into the mountains. And we're heading to a place called Perequin. Now, Perequin during the 1980s was the HQ, was the base of the FMLN. This, as Jonny said, was the left-wing guerrilla group that was fighting the military junta. And it's a really interesting place where they've built a museum to explain kind of their side of the war. And nearby, there's a very moving memorial at a place called El Mozote, which tells the story of a massacre of 900 men, women, and children in 1981, which is written about, for those that are interested, in a fantastic book by Marc. Now, if this is all sounding a little bit somber and a little bit heavy, it's not, because while Perequin acknowledges its past, one of the great things about it is the fact that they've moved on. And they now realize that they are based in an absolutely stunning part of the country that grows a lot of coffee. And they've developed the whole area for ecotourism with walks through beautiful regions, through coffee plantations. And it's a really nice positive story about how people have moved on from the troubles to better days. But Perequin itself is quite slick in the way that they've done it. But there's quite a few other communities in the area that are trying to replicate what Perequin has done. And about 6 years ago, one of our staff here in the UK office, Natalie, who some of you may have met and may know, she actually went out to a place called Nuevo Gaucho for 3 months. And what she was doing here is working with a community of about 100 families that had fled from El Salvador during the problems. They'd been refugees in Honduras, but eventually in the early 90s, they felt confident enough to come back to El Salvador because they really wanted to raise their children in their home country of El Salvador, but they had nothing. They were dirt poor. They found some land by the ruins of a hacienda, and they started gradually to build up a life for themselves. And they wanted to gradually to, welcome tourism, but they had really no idea what they were doing. So Natalie was part of a project that went out there to work with them, to help them work towards that. And just some of the things that she did when she got there was huge amounts of plastic and metal and rubbish everywhere. So they worked with them. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, that picture is actually them using plastic bottles that had been discarded. They collected more rubbish, filled them all up, and actually used these bottles to form eco-bricks. And what they built was a recycling centre, which now, once a month, they collect recycling from all around the local area and then drive it into San Salvador to sell on to a proper recycling plant, and that generates income for the village. And likewise, they were working, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, that was some classes specifically for female education and artistic development that, again, Natalie was working with. And what we do on our tour is we go and have lunch with the people of Nuevo Gaucho and report back to Natalie on how the project's coming along. And that's just a really nice story just to see how that is operating. But when we leave here, I suppose we have a more traditional stop. We head out to Suchitoto, which to some extent is probably El Salvador's kind of most classic colonial city. You've got your cobbled streets, you've got your painted houses, and it's a beautiful place. But one of the things also that Suchitoto has, and which is quite unique to the region, is this. Now, in Spanish, this is the jiquilite plant, and this was, for 300 years, one of the most important and biggest exports of the whole region. And we'll see the process that they take the plant and turn it into organic indigo. And it's a really fascinating process, and it's a great opportunity to see that in action, and obviously kind of buy some things and have a go yourself doing that, which is really good fun. We also have lunch there, and I would say El Salvador cuisine is probably not as refined as it is in Nicaragua, but what you will have, and this is the perennial favorite in El Salvador, are the pupusas. And these are corn-based kind of pate, kind of tortillas, and inside you'll have local cheese, or you'll have refried beans, or you'll have meat, or various combinations, and they are incredibly popular, and people can get through absolutely huge amounts of them. So you'll be kind of loaded with loads of those while we're there. Then we go into kind of El Salvador's volcanic region, and here we get a chance to go to Cerro Verde, go for a walk in the kind of shadow of the volcano. And this is home to some great bird life. You have the emerald toucanet. You've also got the motmot, which is the national animal of El Salvador, as shown by the fact that it's there on the stamps. And nearby, you have Hoya de Serén. Now, this is El Salvador's UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, first look, you may look at it and go, doesn't look particularly impressive. But it is an incredible place, and this is known as the Pompeii of the Americas. And this is Mayan. This dates back 1,400 years. And why this is unique and why this is protected by UNESCO is elsewhere in Central America, you'll find incredible Mayan sites. But what's been preserved have been the big kind of state pyramids and big imperial areas. What happened here is there was a volcanic explosion, and the ash preserved this whole region. And what you see here are the actual living quarters. And this place, which was only discovered in the mid-1970s, has given an incredible insight into how actually day-to-day Mayans lived. And when you look at the thickness of some of the walls and the sturdiness of some of the structures, the slightly sad thing is the Mayans in 600 AD were living to a higher standard than many poor El Salvadorians live today. But it's a fascinating place to go and visit. And from nearby, you've got what's known as the flower route. And this is really just a collection of beautiful little villages, all with their own kind of food stalls and handicrafts. And it's a really popular place to come at the weekends. And it's as popular with locals as it is with foreigners. And that's pretty much kind of our week in El Salvador. Then we cross the border over into Honduras. And one of the first places we go to is called Macaw Mountain, which is, yes, as the name would suggest, a great place to see macaws, but it's also, more importantly, it's a rescue center for birds, exotic birds, which have been sold and basically being put in cages. So they're rescued, they're rehabilitated, and ultimately they are then released back into the wild. So it's a really, really good project that we go and visit. And this is on the outskirts of probably Honduras's most famous site, which is Copan. And this is one of the key Mayan sites in the whole of Central America. And it dates back, parts of it, over 3,000 years, even though the bulk of it was from around 600 to 800 AD. Interestingly, it was completely deserted by the time that the Spanish arrived, and they think that this was due to overpopulation and soil erosion, which shows that these are not aspects which are unique to our times. But it's a great site, and one of the things that it's got that is different from maybe the Tikal that Jonny will talk about in Guatemala with the pyramids, or Palenque in Mexico with its relief panels, are the amazing sculptures that you can see here, just one on the left. The other thing that it's most known for, and again this is unique to Copan, is the hieroglyphic staircase, where the entire staircase is this long Mayan message lauding the praises of the rulers of the day. And it's the longest such structure in the whole of the Mayan world. And again, this is all UNESCO World Heritage as well. Now, when we leave Copan, we go to nearby Gracias, which is a nice, relatively infrequently visited colonial town, and it gets the name Gracias, thank you, supposedly from the Spanish explorers, which had come over the mountainous region, because Honduras is very mountainous, and eventually they found a bit of flat land, and apparently they went, oh, gracias, oh Dios, thank you for giving us a little bit of flat land that we can rest our legs in. So they founded a city there because it was flat. But the main reason why we go there is to go to a nearby village the next day called El Campo. Now, El Campo is inhabited predominantly by the Lenca tribe. Now, the Lenca are indigenous to Honduras. They're the largest indigenous tribe in Honduras, even though they actually only make up 1% of the population. So it's a really interesting experience to meet with them right up in the hills. And they are famed for their red glazed pottery. So we'll spend some time with them learning how they create this pottery. From there, we head further north, the beautiful Lago Chocoyero Lake, the nearby national park and waterfalls, before finally making our way to the Caribbean and the coast at Tela, which is absolutely beautiful, stunning, Caribbean-style beaches. And this will give us access the next day to go and visit a wonderful national park, which is known as Punta Sal, or is also known as the Jeanette Kawas National Park, after a Honduran activist, environmental activist, who unfortunately was murdered in the 90s, partly for her efforts to conserve this area and to protect it from ambitious developers. And this is a great place to see howler monkeys, to see blue moth butterflies, incredibly beautiful. It's also a great place to be introduced to the Garifuna. Now, the Garifuna are the descendants of West African slaves and indigenous Caribs from St. Vincent in the Caribbean, who basically were exiled to this region after a failed uprising against the British. They've got their unique culture, their unique language, clothing, song, dance. They've even got their own flag, and you'll find them in various countries throughout the region. So that's a really, really nice additional element to Honduras. And if you've got more time on the group tour, you can extend, as many people do, onto the Bay Islands, which you can see here just north of the Honduras mainland, not just because they're beautiful beaches, but also because of the history there. Again, a British thing. We had pirates in the region. And back in the time, what did we do with a pirate? We made him a sir. Our most famous pirate was Henry Morgan. At his peak, he had controlled about 5,000 men who would conduct raids on the Spanish Empire there. And you won't find vestiges of pirates there. You won't find Spanish treasure, but what you will find are some beautiful beaches and I suppose a more traditional holiday end to a tour with some absolutely world-class diving. So there you go. That is me for Honduras, and I will now hand you back to Jonny, who will take you through Guatemala.
Thank you, Marc. Great stuff from both you and Richard. I tell you, I've learned quite a lot tonight already, but let's crack on. We're running out of time, so I'm going to tell you about Guatemala and one of my favorite travel destinations. So why is it one of my favorite travel destinations? Well, simply because, as I hope I will illustrate over the course of the next 15 minutes or so, it has everything that the curious traveler could want. It has some of the most extraordinary landscapes. It has a rich and tangible history. It has stunning architecture. It has a decent cuisine, better than you might expect. And of course, most importantly, it has some of the most friendly and hospitable people I've met anywhere. People always ask me, what are my favorite countries? Well, Guatemala would certainly be in my top 10. So I'm going to talk through our Guatemala Tikal and Beyond trip. I took this trip last Christmas, which was a great way to see 1 year out and another year in. And as you can see, it basically works in a clockwise direction from kind of 6 o'clock being Guatemala City, around up to Tikal, Flores, and then back round via the Caribbean coast back to Guatemala City. I'm going to talk about a few characters on this trip as well, because I think one of the most important things about travel is meeting people. And on this trip, you will meet some fascinating people that will help to bring the country to life. It's not just about landscapes and history and culture and architecture and food. I've always believed that it's the people that bring these places to life and make them interesting. And indeed, as a travel writer, you need to meet people to get stories. And that's what I always love to do. I love to chat with local people. And the first person you're going to meet is going to be your tour leader, Alejandro. He is a wonderful chap. He is quite famous because he was a drummer in Guatemala's top rock band. And it's quite funny when people come up to him as he's tour leading and explaining about some archaeological site, and they want his autograph. But he, after 10 years on the road with his band, he gave that up, fed up being away from his wife and daughter, and went back to college and got a master's degree in anthropology and Mayan history. And there could be nobody better to take you around Guatemala. Not only is he an extreme knowledge of his country, but he is a charming man who kind of mixes that lovely balance between information, between making people know what they've got to do, but also being huge fun to travel with. So he's the first person you're going to meet, and you're going to spend your 2 weeks with him. Now, you may think we would start in Guatemala City, given that that's where we've flown into, but we're not going to because the tour doesn't. We fly into Guatemala City, but the likelihood is you're going to arrive there sometime in the afternoon. So we drive the 60 kilometers to the UNESCO World Heritage Town of Antigua. And this really is a gem amongst gems. So it was founded in 1542, and it was the capital of the region until 1773, when there was a massive earthquake which wiped a lot of it out. And that is really one of the things that you get to notice, obviously, as soon as you're there, is these two huge volcanoes, one Volcan de Fuego, obviously the volcano of fire, and the other one which is called Acatengo, which is 3,880 meters above sea level. Sorry, Fuego is just a little bit shorter than that at 3,780 meters. And as you can see here from my group at Christmas, there's a little viewpoint above the town, and it's just the most stunning landscape. Over my left shoulder, sorry, is the other volcano. They do smoke every now and again. The last time this one, which is Acatengo erupted, was in 1972, but they do spew bits of lava out every now and again. And one night we were sitting at our hotel having dinner, looking out at it, and we could see this beautiful glow coming out of the top of the mountain, so out of the volcano. So it does spew every now and again, but don't worry, it's unlikely to happen when you're there. The city itself, of course, is made up of some extraordinary Spanish Baroque architecture, which is what gives it its World Heritage status. In the main plaza, which you have here, is the Cathedral of St. James, which was built in 1545 and houses the remains of a conquistador called Pedro de Alvarado. There's the beautiful Church of Merced, which was constructed in 1749 and has an extraordinary interior. There is the Church and Convent of Capucin, which was built in 1739. And perhaps most spectacular of all, or at least my favorite, was the Church of San Francisco, which was inaugurated in the 16th century, but which was pretty much destroyed by an earthquake and was abandoned for 200 years. And you can still see the roof has not been repaired, but part of it has, and it is now an active church. It was repaired in the 1960s and is a beautiful church. And then the Church of Santa Clara, which again is another famous site of the town and often has a market in front of it. And that's another kind of important part of your stay in Antigua, is there is plenty of good shopping to be done, both of the kind of souvenir type and of normal things that people would buy themselves. It's a great place. Because we arrived there kind of late one afternoon, we stayed for 3 nights, which means you get a good amount of time to really enjoy this fabulous town. I spent 3 weeks there back in 1990, staying with a Spanish family and learning my Spanish, which I've sadly forgotten most of. From there, we take a chicken bus. I was talking about those in my introduction. We jump on board one of the local buses and we go to the village of San Miguel Escobar, where we start to learn about the coffee production of the area. We go up into the hills and start to kind of do a bit of picking and everything else. The main reason for that is that we meet this amazing guy called Daniel. He is a local cooperative farmer. He has his coffee plantation on the banks of the volcano, which of course are very fertile. And he takes us for a morning up into the hills to show us his plants and tell us about how he grows them. But also then he brings us down to his home, where he shows us literally the whole process, how they wash them, they grade them. You can even have a go at grinding them and of course brewing them. And then we sit and have lunch with his family and learn about that way of life. He sells, with this cooperative, they sell all their coffee through, as I say, a fair trade organization into the United States. So they get a decent buck for their coffee. So that's a fascinating morning. When we get back into town, the excitement hasn't finished as we learn how to make chocolate in one of the chocolate stores. Chocolate, of course, is the cacao pod is grown in Guatemala, in the whole of this region, of course, very famous for its chocolate. Venezuela, Peru, Colombia, all have great chocolate. And we make our own chocolate bars. And I have to say, even though I didn't do this, the guys that did that made some fantastic chocolate. We stay at a place called Villa Colonial, which is a very nice hotel, probably about 4-star. There is a smarter hotel there for tailor-made clients in an old monastery, but this represents a nice place to stay as we do our tour of Antigua. So from there, now kind of moving around, if you like, we're at 6 o'clock, now we're moving to 7 o'clock as we go clockwise around the circuit. We get to Lake Atitlan, which is really one of the jewels, one of the many jewels, I should say, in Guatemala's shimmering tourist crown. It's the deepest lake in Central America at 340 meters and covers 130 square kilometers. It was formed 84,000 years ago when a volcano collapsed, hence why it's so deep. And it's said by locals to carry supernatural powers. And indeed, you do find quite a lot of alternative thinkers and hippies that have made it their home from Europe and North America. It's a stunning place at any time of day. We stay here right on the lake shore at Micasso Hotel. It's not luxury, but it's a really nice guest house, as you can see, with the views looking over the lake any time of day, absolutely beautiful. Particularly when you're on the Christmas trip. This was Christmas morning 2019. So that was a photograph I took then. You can see the fishermen just going out in the early morning light And it's beautiful any time of day. One of the experiences we do here, we climb up the Indian's nose. You can probably tell why it's called that. It is quite a tough climb, but the views from the top are absolutely amazing. If you don't want to do that, and it takes about 2.5 hours, then that's no problem. We provide another guide called Marco, who I'll show you in a minute, and he takes you around the village nearby called San Jose, which is famous for its murals and little museums. But then we all meet up at Marco's house for a good Guatemalan lunch, which is great fun, and these guys look after you. So there's Marco and Juana and Juana. Now you may wonder why they're both called the same name. Well, one is his wife and one is his sister. So they both help look after us for lunch, and again, show us around their home and how they live on the shores of Lake Atitlan. From here, carrying on around, we're now back up to about 9 o'clock, I suppose. We get to the famous market at Chichicastenango. This was the place that I was en route to, where I shared my seat with 4 generations of the same family. To the earlier conquistadors mention there being a market here over 500 years ago, and it's as important for locals today as it is for tourists. It's the main market in the Department of Quiché, and people of various Mayan ethnic groups come here on Thursdays and Sundays. It's set, you can see here on the side of the church, and it kind of swoops off to the right with many stalls. You can see here. The main thing that it's, even though you can buy pretty much anything here, from fruit and veg and, you know, all sorts of things, what it's really famous for is its textiles. And that's why the local Mayans come here. Each particular ethnic group will have a slightly different weave, sometimes with different colors. So some Mayan women will be wearing predominantly blue, or others predominantly purple, others predominantly red, so people can work out which ethnic group they belong to. Also, right on the edge of town is probably the most colorful cemetery you are ever going to see. Even in death, the Guatemalans are colorful people. It's the most extraordinary place, absolutely beautiful. And here we have lunch with Tomasa. Now, Tomasa doesn't only knock up a very good lunch, she is also the local mask maker. And the masks are used by locals in for their religious purposes, as they kind of mix and merge the old pagan ways with the modern Catholicism. She also has an effigy to Maximo. He is a local deity who women will come and give cigarettes and alcohol to, in hope that he helps them conceive a child. So that's Maximo, and that is Chichicastenango. From here now we're getting up to kind of 10 o'clock. We get into the Ixal Triangle, and this is a stunning region. Where, you know, the whole of this trip so far has been up in the highlands, but this is kind of the Western Highlands, an absolutely beautiful area. We'll stay at a hacienda, a working hacienda called San Antonio. Again, it's relatively simple, but it's nice, good, homely food. You can see the lady here cooking our lunch on a barbecue. And we'll have some great walks to local waterfalls, and also visit an orchid farm, because there's some very rare orchids that grow in this part of the country. We'll also visit the amazing limestone bridges at a place called Sumek-Champe, which is extraordinary. It's 300 meters of limestone bridges, one over another, all the while underneath running the Carabon River. The name Sumek-Champe literally means where the river hides under the stones, and that's what it does here. Amazing formations which form these wonderful pools where you simply won't be able to resist to get your kit off and jump in and have a swim. It's also amazing biosphere with some amazing birds, including the toucan. But perhaps more poignantly in this area, we will also go to the village of San Juan Quetzal, which has a beautiful church, and it's a traditional old mountain village. But the main reason we're going here is because we're going to meet a chap called Lucas. Now, back in the early 80s, the Ixal Triangle was at the heart of the country's 3-decade-long brutal civil war. And Lucas's village was on the front line between the army and the partisans. At the age of 7, Lucas witnessed the army burst into his home and drag his 12-year-old cousin out onto the street, who they suspected of being part of the partisans, and shot him. He's now an expert knowledge in Mayan local languages and culture, And Lucas explains to those that are interested the history of those tumultuous times. This was a real privilege, actually, to have an insight into this relatively recent past and have Lucas explain to us everything about it, which was really quite humbling. What was also fascinating was that in his living room, he has a 16th century Spanish mural that stretches right the way across his wall. I mean, I'm talking something like, I don't know, 20 feet. He doesn't want it photographed and he doesn't want to make it too famous because he doesn't want lots of people coming to see it, but it was a pretty extraordinary thing there as well. So from here now we're heading further north and we're getting now into the Mayan world. And this is where we visit Chiminos Island and the Pitex Batum Lagoon. This is an extraordinary journey. Really, it feels like you're traveling back into the midst of time, to journey to the center of the earth or something. The actual lodge we stay at is lovely, very simple, but very nice. We take it over. There are only about 9-10 rooms there, so we have the whole place to ourselves. And from here, we travel by boat up into the lagoon to visit an extraordinary place called Aquateca. And this is one of the early Mayan settlements. The settlement dates back here 300 BC, but it had its heyday between 200 to 800 AD. And because of its isolation, it doesn't get visited very often, but it's an absolutely beautiful site with amazing plaza, steps and engraved steles, temples, homes, etc. It's situated 100 meters above the lagoon, so you get these epic views down over the surrounding countryside. There's also the Yaxche, which we go to, which was the third biggest city in the Mayan civilization in this area. And that gives you an idea of it from the viewpoint from above. And the sunset from there over the Yaxche Lake is absolutely mind-blowing. But of course, everybody that heads to Guatemala that has an interest in the Mayan culture have really got one goal in mind, and that's to visit the extraordinary site of Tikal. So Tikal dates back between, its main period has been 200 and 900 AD. It's a vast area, covers 16 square kilometers, has over 3,000 buildings, temples, pyramids, etc. And really is absolutely, obviously it's UNESCO World Heritage, but it's also, in my opinion, absolutely on a par with Machu Picchu or Angkor Wat, or even the Great Pyramids of Giza. It's truly stunning. You can quite easily get there when there aren't that many people, getting there just after sunrise, before the crowds start to come, about 10, 11 o'clock. And when I say crowds, we're not talking the levels that one would get to see at Machu Picchu. Stuck right in the dense jungle as it is, it's really spectacular. It needs at least 4 hours to go around because there are lots of, it's not just about the main plaza and the main sites, there are lots of other temples and palaces and stuff that one wants to go and see. So amazing site, you need at least half a day there, which of course we have on the trip. But that's not the end of the trip. Now you're coming back around the other side as we head down towards kind of 3 o'clock. We take a wonderful boat journey up the Rio Dulce, the sweet river, on our way to the Caribbean coast and Livingston. And this is where you get the same people that Marc was talking about, the coming in from the St. Vincent, the Garifuna people, which is a Caribbean community who live on the shores of the Caribbean here. And we will have a chance to go up onto one of the beaches where we can relax before heading back down to Guatemala City and home. Guatemala City, yeah, I'll tell you a very quick story. It used to have a reputation for being a little bit of a dangerous place. And back in 1990, I was walking along the street there and a young lad came up to me and said, "Hey, Mister. And I leant down to see him. He said, "No, Mister." I leant down further. He grabbed the sunglasses off my face and ran off down into a side street. I didn't chase him that far. I thought my Ray-Bans probably weren't worth it. The reputation is much improved. It is a beautiful city. It has some amazing architecture. It has some great markets. And bizarrely, it has the world's biggest relief map of the country. That is a view looking down from Belize down towards the highlands at the bottom corner. So it is an extraordinary journey. As I say, one of my favorite destinations. This trip really takes you everywhere, really off the beaten track. and to the highlights as well. It runs 5 times a year, from January, March, May, November, and December, which was the trip that I took. So, and just as a quick reminder, if you want to do them all in one go, that is the Central American Odyssey that takes you through Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Now, I realize we're slightly running over time, so I'm just going to be quick before we go to a couple of questions and tell you that we're traveling again. Obviously, COVID has been a bit of a disaster for the travel industry, and we haven't run a trip since March of this year. But week before last, I took a group to Turkey, and we did a great trip right out there in eastern Turkey, along the border with Armenia. That shot is taken at the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Ani, which was amazing. We have 2 more trips running this autumn that are COVID viable, if you like. Another one in Turkey from the Black Sea to the Golden Horn, which is 11 days starting on the 22nd of October, and another one in northern Greece along the Via Egnatia on the 18th of October, which is £2,554. I should have put that in dollars as well. I do apologize for those of you watching from America. So great trips that would be very viable, and both are about to be guaranteed tomorrow, I think. Other things to tell you about: we are keeping our reduced deposit offer, £25 or $34, and on all tailor-made journeys are 10% deposits, that's all. And of course, we still have our COVID promise, where if the trip isn't COVID viable, you will get a refund. So just quickly, the groups are maximum group size 12, tour leader and local guides, interesting and comfortable accommodation and transport, as I hope we've just shown you, full board, so most meals are included, COVID health and safety policy in line with the World Tourism Council, and full tailor-made services for our travel specialists, both in the UK and the US. And of course, we are ATOL protected. So that's me rushing through it a little bit at the end there. Sorry about that. But now let's hand back to Mike to see if we've got a couple of questions to answer.
Thanks very much, Jonny. Yes, we've had a few questions. First one is regarding the safety of the region. So Sarah, well, Max firstly asks, is crime a problem in Honduras? And Sarah as well would like to know how safe in particular El Salvador and Honduras are. So perhaps that's one for Marc.
Sure. You have to keep your sensible hat on, but the main cities that have got a reputation in Honduras especially will be the capital, Tegucigalpa, La Ceiba on the coast, and San Pedro Sula. Those are the 3 cities that have got the worst reputations, and it's mainly because of gang warfare. So even if you visited those cities, just keeping a sensible head on you, you'd be fine. But generally where we're going, not a problem. It's not to say that there's no crime, it's just to say that you need to just not be paranoid, but just be aware that it is rare and tourists are not generally the target. It's more gang warfare between themselves. Great,
thank you. And Howard would like to know how coronavirus has affected these countries and whether they're opening up at all.
Well, the quick answer to that is that yes, literally all 4 countries opened to tourism last Friday. It's not quite as simple as you can just jump on a plane and fly in. There are certain regulations, like you have to have a COVID test 72 hours before you arrive. But all the countries that we've been speaking about tonight are now accepting travelers from both the US and the UK, and I assume everywhere else as well. Richard, you might have something to say on that.
Yeah, just to back up what you just said, that they're all opening up. We'll have to see if there's going to be some sort of spike and if they're going to decide to close again. Hopefully not, because they're taking a lot of precautions with the visitors. And thankfully, they all opened up together.
Yeah, I actually spoke to our guide Alejandro today just to ask him about that situation, given that I knew we were having this talk. And he said that the Guatemalan government have been very sensible and that things have been handled really well there. And they're hoping that things will get back to normal, possibly even to run trips there for Christmas. So let's hope that's the case.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Anna would like to know how safe it is to walk amongst those very active volcanoes. Assume that's Guatemala.
Yeah, back in the day, back in the 90s, it was very unsafe to do that walk. Tourists that went up there in the 90s were very often mugged, had whatever they had left on them taken. And really, even now, you should take a local guide with you. That's really the answer. If you take a local guide, as we did, and walk up there, it's absolutely fine. But to go wandering off on your own, I think there are still possibilities. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's still possibilities that one could get mugged or something. So again, as Marc was saying, just be sensible and take a local guide, which will be much better for you anyway, because you know you'll have more fun and you'll learn more.
Thanks, Jonny. Again, this is probably one for Richard. Deirdre would like to know about the safety of Nicaragua, particularly with regards to the political situation. There was kind of reports of a lot of demonstrations last year. How are things now in Nicaragua?
Right. There were big demonstrations in 2018, April 2018 to July, and there was a government crackdown that followed. Those people who were thrown in jail basically for opposing the government have been let free, and let's say that it's calm, but there's still unhappiness about the government. But there's no political unrest. It's just looking forward to the elections in 2021 and hopefully a change of government for many people.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple of questions just regarding the routing of the group trip, the Central American Odyssey, and which parts of the places we've spoken about tonight that tour visits. I guess I could sum that up in an email tomorrow, including the routing. That may be the easiest thing.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that obviously the Nicaragua standalone trip is 2 weeks. The El Salvador Honduras trip is 2 weeks. Guatemala is 2 weeks. So if you wanted to do all three, you would need a month and a half. We've condensed, in a way, we tried to find a balance between some highlights, some offbeat experiences, and to try and show, I think, the contrasts between the 4 countries over the 3 weeks of the Odyssey trip. So yeah, if Mike, you can include that in the email tomorrow, that would be great. But yeah, you'll see a combination, but obviously you won't get to see everything if you want to combine it all in 3 weeks. But it's still a great trip. Great.
Well, actually, on that, Pinky would like to know whether it's possible to combine the 2-week El Salvador and Honduras with the 2-week Guatemala trip. I guess that depends on departure dates.
I know Johnny's going to be looking at me because I'm responsible for scheduling trips. I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe. Let's go with a maybe. But if not, all I'll say is Richard will be able to kind of design some tailor-made stuff for you to kind of add on if it's not exactly possible.
It's interesting how many times this comes up, Marc, during these webinars. I hope you're taking notes.
Great.
Great. Well, that's all we have question-wise. So, yeah, as I mentioned, we'll be sending an email tomorrow with a link to view the talk again. So I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us and have a great rest of the evening or rest of the day, depending on your time zone. We hope to see you again at one of these talks soon. We'll send details out as soon as we've got the next one scheduled. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.